Hello, welcome everyone to this webinar, which is part of a series of 3 webinars we're running on Tuesdays at 1:30 during November. And we're looking at the skills that carers bring to the workplace. If you're wishing to return to work whilst you're still caring, or if your circumstances have changed in some way and you want to go back to work. So this week we'll be looking at the skills and experiences that you develop as a carer that employees value. Next week, we'll have 2 people talking about their own experiences about returning to the workplace and what they found the skills they had developed as a carer brought to them in the workplace. And then in the 3rd week, we will be looking at the feelings and the emotional support that you might require if you're considering going back into the workplace or just return to the workplace as well. So just to say that we are really grateful for a grant from the Dementia Services Development Trust, which has allowed us to do this 6-month project to support and empower carers to understand the values and skills they develop as a carer. We're kicking off with these webinars, and then we'll be doing some further work on a one-to-one basis with carers to support them in recognising their own skills. We're joined today by Susan, who is a professional speaker and a trainer for organisations. She has spent many years assisting employees to develop the skills that employers want, and also to coach leaders in teams to be able to maintain their own resilience, well-being, and to support members of their team. During the past 7 years, she has been a full-time spousal carer for her husband. And it was during this time that Susan really began to recognise that the skills were interchangeable. She was learning things in the caring role that she would then take into the workplace, and things that she was teaching and learning herself in the workplace were transferable to her caring role. So I'd really like to thank her for the presentation that she's going to give to us today, but also to a team of staff from Dementia Carers Count who have joined us and will be facilitating rooms when we break into smaller breakout rooms to discuss what Susan has told us. Many work in very different departments in Dementia Carers Count to the services delivery, and it's only through their support and their kindness and generosity that they've offered to step outside of their normal role to help us with these webinars. So thank you very much to them. So this is how it's going to work. Susan is going to give us a 15 to 20 minute presentation, and then we will break into breakout rooms. You won't need to do anything. We will do that for you. You'll just get a little button to click to say join, and you'll follow through and join it into a breakout room. You'll be with 4 or 5 other carers and a facilitator from Dementia Carers Count. And we'll give you some questions just to help you in discussion around what you heard Susan said and how perhaps that resonates with you. And we do this because it's really important to gain the support of peers, but also to hear other people's views and opinions, and can be really helpful to people to gain that sort of support. After about 15 minutes, we'll bring you back into the main room, and the facilitators will feed back to the main group on your behalf. So you won't need to be speaking in front of lots of people at all. After we've done that, Susan will give her final thoughts and reflections. And once we've completed that, we will deploy a poll. We'd really like you to fill it in. There's just 6 questions, and it asks you how you found the webinar. And it's really important for us for our own development and for developing future webinars as well. So it'd be really great if you could fill in that webinar at the end. We do have other events coming up, the webinars over the next 2 Tuesdays, but we also have a Facebook lunch and listen session this Thursday, where we will be talking about self-care for carers in the workplace. And we did have a lunch and listen a week or so back, again around workplace and caring and the skills that you develop. And that's available on our YouTube channel if you'd like to watch that as well. So I think I've said more than enough for now, and I think it's time for me to pass over to Susan. So Susan, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll put myself on mute now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue, for that nice introduction. I am really happy to be here because I wanted to meet the people that really would like to consider going back to work. You may not have heard of me, all of you, but you probably have heard of Ian. Ian, the horrible hurricane, I call it. Recently, Ian visited the west coast of Florida, where I live in Sarasota. And fortunately, we did not get a lot of problems in our area. However, before the hurricane came, during the hurricane and after the hurricane, I felt scared. I felt anxious. I felt disoriented. Those feelings were very familiar. They were similar to the caring feelings I had as a carer in the beginning. I was disoriented. I was confused, not knowing what responsibilities I would have in my new role and what was I supposed to do. As carers, you and I had to learn new roles, new skills in new ways. And guess what? We learned not only about dementia, we learned how to manage those behaviors with our family members and friends, or maybe learn to manage our own schedules, reorganize ourselves, especially manage our feelings. But there were positive results from those learnings. We learned about ourselves. Adversity introduces us to ourselves. This is a credited to Albert Einstein. And Albert Einstein, as you know, was a pretty smart guy. So, but the good news about that is where there is pain, there could be gain. And the good news is that today, the employees, now I wouldn't say own the market, but we have more autonomousness in the marketplace. We are valued outside, generally as workers. I remember back when I was early in the 70s, when my children were young and I was working full time, we had the policy of if your kids were sick, you could go home and work from home. But at that time, I wasn't taking advantage of the corporation that I was in, but my manager brought me into her office, sat me down and said, if you did take time out for sick children, you will not be have the opportunity to be promoted. And I'm thinking about that. That's a the distance between those 1970s and today are so different. And here's why employees or potential employees have the upper hand in some cases. The good news is the trends are working for us. First trend is workers are needed. Yes, they are. They're needed because of COVID, actually. But also because of COVID, there's been this great resignation worldwide. And so in the UK and the United States, workers are needed, and that's a good thing for us. Secondly, there's a workplace variable. What was going on in 1970s is nowhere like that now. People have opportunities to be doing part-time work, work at home, contract work, consultant work, all variables that we never had before as workers. Our absence from the workplace is not that unusual. It was unusual a long time ago, but because of COVID, thank you very much, COVID, absence is happening, and mostly because of people, women in particular, being home, helping ill people or taking care of their children or working with their care recipients. And last but not least, the costs of human development, the costs of our development in human development is that expenses of getting a worker hired upskilled, oriented, placed is very, very expensive. And so that cost is important, and employers recognize that cost. So employers are trying very hard to keep their employees happy and engaged, which leads to, of course, productivity, which leads to the customers being satisfied and generates more profits for it. So human capital is now considered one of the most powerful assets that an organization's success is based on. And so that is immeasurable now. Even charities and nonprofits have to be financially responsible. So all those trends are in our favor as workers. So now let's consider, if we are going back into the workplace, what kind of skills and competencies might employers be expecting of us? Well, let's look at that. First, let's talk about what skills are compared to competencies. Skills are what we do. They are the accounting, the payroll, the teaching, the preaching. They are skills that we do. The competencies, however, are how we do them. And those include the skills, but it also includes knowledge, abilities, behaviors, our attitudes, how we problem solve, how we assess things, and especially how we understand ourselves and others, because that combination is important to employers. Employers want us to have the basic skills and the basic competencies of a job. For example, if you were a history teacher, you would have to have some knowledge of history, of course, in that you'd have some depth of knowledge there. You would also have to have some knowledge of certain situations in the classroom. You may need to know some basic technologies like how to access YouTube for a video to share with the class. Maybe you'd even want to know how to videotape the students. But how we develop those skills are skills that I just mentioned, how we develop those skills and deploy them at a higher level of creativity is our competency. And it is beyond just those basic skills. And that's what makes the difference between a good teacher and a fantastic teacher. So here are what I consider, and most others, the top skills and competencies that employers are looking for. There's communication, that's obvious. How we organize ourselves, organization, teamwork is important. Our work ethic, how we show up professionally. Integrity, in that case, means I do what I say I will do. That's very important in the workplace. How we think of things in a critical way so that it's not just our biases, but critical thinking. Social skills are important to employers. Creativity and resourcefulness. Maybe we're not particularly creative, but often we can be pretty resourceful. Adaptability and learning and willingness to learn. Friendliness, open-mindedness. So that whole idea of being accepting of other cultures and other types of people, and emotional intelligence. Now you will notice that the questions an interviewer might ask might be something like, tell me about when you were successful in dealing with troublesome students, let's say, or tell me about a time when you were not so successful or effective. How did you correct that? Those are long time perennial questions, but good questions for us to be prepared, because maybe we haven't been in the classroom for a long time, or we haven't been in our chosen profession for a long time. So we might shift the question a bit by describing how we managed an unruly or difficult care recipient. For example, when he didn't want to get dressed to visit the doctor, or when he refused his meds. The question is not necessarily about dealing with the student or the dementia patient. It's more about how we dealt with the student or the dementia patient. And that, the how, is the competency and what an employer is looking for. However, I have to say that some interviewers may not be able to build that bridge of understanding. So we, as an interviewee, might do that by sharing some of our scenarios or little stories, concise stories on how that is similar to a unruly student in the classroom, for example. Now, you will notice that these 10 competencies, there are 3 highlighted boxes. The first highlighted box is communication. Communication is one of the top skills and competencies that employers want. And as you know, we need to communicate clearly in our lives when we were caregivers, or as we are caregivers, carers today, in order to correct meds, perhaps with our family members, to order the correct meds at the pharmacist, or listen carefully and clarify by asking questions with medical professionals that want us to do a certain new skill. So we have to use that communication. We need to advocate for our carers, for our care recipients rather. That takes diplomacy, that takes influencing skills. So those kinds of things are happening as we provide care for our loved ones and our family members. Adaptability is the second box that's highlighted with darker green, and that is adaptability and willingness to learn. Those are very viable competencies that I used when I was first learning about my husband's 3 comorbidities. I had to gain as much knowledge as I could about his illness and how to deal with the personality changes on a weekly, monthly basis. Sometimes that is very resistant on my part because I didn't want that to happen, but I had to accept his limited mobility, his changes, and the loss in our life socially. And that is a form of adaptability and adjustment to change. And those are primary competencies in the workplace: adaptability and willingness to change, and resourcefulness on how to do that. The third box that's darker is emotional intelligence. And some of you may have heard of that, some of you may not have. Emotional intelligence is, and I use EQ and IQ interchangeably, they mean the same thing. Most of us have heard of intellectual intelligence, IQ. Emotional, that's the mental intelligence, but that's value added when we have some intelligence about how we feel and how we interact with ourselves and with others. So here on this slide, you can see a whole list of factors that impact emotional intelligence. Identifying people's feelings and our own, that's really important. And these not only are important in the workplace, these are important because we are doing them as carers. Know what our personal strengths are and our limitations. That's ultimate. Self-acceptance and being confident about our abilities is important. Letting go of our mistakes. Sometimes our mistakes just stay with us. Well, it's time to move on. As you can see in the workplace, these are just as important as what we use and have used in caring for our loved one. Being interested, oh, I missed one. Accepting change and personal change is most difficult for me. I can do it better and professionally, but personal, it's tough. Being interested in others genuinely, being sensitive to our own feelings and to others' feelings, accepting responsibility for mistake. I think this one is the hallmark of maturity, accepting responsibility for my mistakes, and managing The last one is managing emotions in difficult situations, which you and I know as carers are almost guaranteed that we will have at least once a week a difficult situation. The last one I have a little plus beside, because I believe it is the most difficult thing, whether you're in the home with your family member or whether you're at work. It is not easy to not get involved emotionally. So that is one of the factors that job interviewees or interviewers looking at the interviewees. And in fact, there was a Southwest Airlines, you may have heard of them or not, in the United States years ago, started to interview in groups. So the potential hires, people that were going to be hired, were put in a group. And so the employer was looking for how they interacted in that setting when they were interviewed, and whether they acted competitive against the other interviewees or whether they acted congenial and sociable toward the other potential, because they were in competition with each other. But that was a wonderful EQ, emotional intelligence measure. And since then, a lot of companies have been using that. So I wanted to share that because I think it's important for us to know how that is. Okay, by the way, at the bottom of this slide is the words caregiving of the mind. Caregiving of the mind is the proposed title of the book that I am writing. And that's a memoir. And in those stories, I have pulled out the emotional intelligence scenarios, enlisted them, and put them in a chart and added how they might translate into the workplace. So if you're interested in having a copy of that, I would appreciate having you give me an email, and here's my email address, and I will be happy to send a copy of that chart to you. And I'll have this, you'll be able to get these slides, so you'll have that email as well. Okay. It's now, I think we're up to breakout groups. I would like to know in the breakout groups, what are some skills and competencies that you learned as a carer, given those kinds of things we just talked about? And while you're there in the talking with one another, briefly explain how you learn them, because those will be the keys to put together some kind of verbal and written correspondence to the potential employer. So we're going to take about 15 minutes, and hopefully we'll get about a 2-minute. You may see me in and out of the rooms, but we're going to, through the magic of technology, we're going to put you into the different breakout rooms.
Thanks, Susan. Oh, I was about to say, could you stop screen sharing? You did it for me. Thank you so much, Susan. That was so helpful. And just some of those slides, you start kind of penny drop moments for me of, wow, yeah, absolutely. There's so many skills that are transferable, aren't they? So in 1 second, Rob, who's one of our team, is going to move people into breakout rooms. You shouldn't need to do anything. You might have to click one button, but it'll all be self-explanatory. And you'll be joined by a facilitator from Dementia Carers Count, who will facilitate and keep you a little bit on track, but we know conversations like to go off at a bit of a tangent, and that's good too, because any diversity of thoughts is really important. The facilitators in your group will pose 2 questions that I've got written down here, along with the scenario that Susan's just said to you. So the 2 questions you'll be asked as a group, now I've lost my piece of paper that has it on now, sorry, apologies, is when Susan spoke about the skills she's applying to or has applied to her everyday caring role, what resonated with you? We'd really like to hear your own experiences about which skills it was that she talked about that perhaps were relevant to you. And what ways this presentation that Susan's kindly done for us has made you consider how your day-to-day care and responsibilities could transfer to future employees, whatever employment that might be, because I think Susan gave us a good top 10 that goes across the industries. And so just knowing how it affects you. And then Susan, just to recap, what was your challenge for the group that you want people to think about?
Exactly what you asked.
Okay. All right. I've just asked it in a slightly different way. That's okay then.
Perfect.
So let's do, as Susan said, the magic. And Rob, if you can move us all into breakout rooms, that'll be fantastic. And you just need to click when it asks you to join a room.
Well, it's good to see everyone back. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time. Yes, good. I heard a few things, so I'll let the facilitators share what they heard, and I'm going to try, and probably Sue will probably record some of these things just so we know what you have talked about. And if the first facilitator said some of the things that you heard, then it would be helpful to just acknowledge, yes, we heard that too, unless there's a variation on the theme that we need to understand. So we're going to start, I believe, with Helen. Helen, would you like to report out what you heard in your group?
Thank you. Yeah, great. We had a lovely discussion, really, really interesting. We covered a number of things, and the group was kind of consisting of people with different kind of needs for this session, in terms of balancing current workplace, looking for new kind of a new role after caring, and that kind of, so there was quite a range of people. I think the key thing was there was a couple of comments about skills missed, and one of them was spinning plates. So the idea that actually everything is at such a fine balance. The other one was patience, that actually was a skill that someone particularly ways that they had to learn, because it was something they weren't, so they had to learn to slow things down, to accept that things weren't always going to take, so they had to sort of change their pace, and it was about adapting and adaptability. I think one of the things that really resonated was the idea of letting go of mistakes. That really was quite strong for the group, and a real sense of, we had quite a conversation about that, and the idea that carers actually often are making a lot of very difficult decisions, and that can come with some residual guilt, because you're making these big calls. I mean, sometimes they're very small decisions, but all the time you're making decisions and thinking on behalf of someone that you haven't had to do before. So it was about kind of thinking about that sort of challenging situations, decision making, those kind of skills. I think that we had another conversation that was slightly to the side, but also very much about people feeling their identity as a carer, and when that actually kind of popped into them, and then how that impacted how they saw themselves as an employee, because suddenly they were then having to go to their boss, and instead of asking for a raise or asking for something to do with work, they were then asking for time off to care, or and it made a different dynamic. So it was about sort of seeing your role as a carer and an employee, and also just how important it was that some people found workplaces that they had their different identity. So they weren't 24/7 only a carer, they were able to be someone else for that time while they were in work, and have those different relationships. So I think
Wow.
that was a summary of everything we talked about.
That's a lot. That's great. Good for you. Good for your group. You covered a lot. Thank you, Helen. And the next one I think we have on the list is Munkit. Munkit's group.
Hi everyone. Yes, it was. I had a very good conversation with the people in my group, and they expressed a whole range of things that they've had to cope with, and things that they've had to learn, and certainly being a carer. The feedback I got was being a carer was it reduced their confidence after being away from the workplace for quite a while, and the confidence had to be relearned, and communication skills as well. And being a carer, communication is very important in different ways, not least having to be the go-between between the health professionals and clinicians, and learning a whole range of new words and vocabulary and language, and being able to relay that back to the person they're caring for in a way they might understand, or other members of the family as well, and especially if English is not your first language. So it's something that I experience in a smaller way, but I fully understand that. Certainly family carers or unpaid carers don't get the support that we think they should have, and unless they get that support, there is a great danger of them being so stressed that they develop their own mental health problems, and certainly that could well make the situation worse. Carers are always under pressure, and it's a challenge getting back into work, but the people in my group, most of them were currently in work, so that they've managed to cope, and their experiences and their feedback sounded very important to me.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. That covered a wide range, didn't it? And our next presenter will be Kirsty. Am I saying that, Kirsty, correctly?
You are correctly. Thank you, Susan. I had the most wonderful group, and we were talking so much we didn't notice that we were coming to an end. So I apologize that we all left in the middle of the conversation. But we again talked about adaptability and the willingness to change, particularly in relation to the dementia pathway, in the sense that just the modifications that you need to make along the way. It's you're training from scratch. The learning curve is so steep, and really just going from those early days to an end of life experience, they are quite different experiences. And you know, from a workplace perspective, you know, that's you've been really promoted up the channels there to get to the point where you're dealing and adapting at that level. There is also talk about how you provide key issues such as dignity and self-respect, and allowing that for somebody else. The safeguarding issues, enabling quality of life, all of these skills which may be considered soft skills, but incredibly important. Dealing with being burnt out, but having to carry on, having to pick up the pieces and start again, and the importance of communication, the calm ability to listen and just to be with someone in the moment, and adapt your language, whether it's your spoken language or your body language, or just the way that you work with somebody, and all of those communication skills. So just absolutely so much to say. And we had and somebody in our group is really thinking about a role in the tech industry, and so we were just working through how some of these skills on the list could be actually moved across into that field as well. So just a brilliant group.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. And I'll talk about something in a moment here that you brought up, but thanks, Kirsty. And our last person, or have we covered everyone? Carolyn, I think you're next.
We've got three more, Susan. We've got Carolyn, Fran, and Sue.
Oh, Sue, yes, I didn't have you down here, so how could I forget you? All right, Carolyn, just if you can summarize in maybe 2 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Before the sun gets me, it's coming through the window and taking over my face at the moment. Yeah, I had a fabulous group. Some of the skills that we spoke about and what resonated was, being able to read the room and not knowing what's going to be, perhaps in front of you, and being able to read the situation was a real skill. Patience, which I think is really important in the workplace, and it is a big one for a carer. Resourcefulness. We're getting little help as a carer, so having to find it yourself. Resourcefulness is a really big one. I'm just going to speed through these, but they were really fantastic, so probably not doing them justice. But letting go came up for us as well, so not beating yourself up, not being stuck in those feeling what you've made as a mistake, and kind of to yourself. Being responsible for another person. These are all incredible skills and competencies to take into the workplace. And just one other thing that came up was even going for interviews, and if you're caring, and if you get a phone call, or not even knowing if you're going to get a phone call in that interview, it can be really difficult, and having to navigate that, and how much do you tell an employer? So we just spent a little bit of time thinking about, okay, are there employers out there that is a bit more flexible and would be understanding of the situation? So having time to think about what employers might be best to be seeking in those situations for you. And I'll leave it there, but yeah, brilliant group.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And our second to last will be Fran and then Sue.
Hi there. We had a lovely group. We had a real mix, actually. We had carers as well as some professionals that had come in to get an understanding, so that they can then take it back to people that they're supporting, carers with someone with dementia. One of the big themes that came up through us was just managing emotions, and how they can be different every single day. One day doesn't carry on with the next day. You could have the same scenario, but having to be really creative to problem solve. So many times the normal course of action wouldn't work. So you've just got to think outside of the box and constantly have that constant process of just trying something new, thinking of something that might be a little bit out of the norm, which I really like that kind of thinking. We looked at attitudes of employers as well, and just how those have changed over time. Sort of go back 20, 30 years ago, those attitudes are changing, and it's maybe encouraging carers that people have changed, that employers are making allowances, and there is empathy in employers as well. Carers have obviously got this incredible empathetic strain that's running through everything that they're doing on a day-to-day basis, and carers are your employers are valuing that. And something that we talked about, which hasn't come up, a few of the bits and pieces have already been talked about, but we talked about different cultural backgrounds as well, and how dementia might be viewed, and that was a really interesting conversation. I know something that DCC picks up on in some of our other sessions as well. How there is a stigma around dementia, or just the word empathy, for example. What is that? Because actually in some cultures that might not be something that is understood as a word, as a term. So really interesting to kind of understand what these characteristics are that people are picking up, but then how do you describe those going through into a new job? So yeah, a really lovely group, but a really varied discussion. So it was great.
Thank you very much, Fran. And Sue?
Okay, so I'm the final one to feedback, so I'm going to say I had the most fantastic group out of everyone, and no one can come back on that. So we said very much the same things. It was around emotional resilience when you're looking after some incredibly complex needs, adaptability, learning to adapt, as all of these people have talked about before, organisational skills, being able to multitask and organise, and that emotional intelligence that allows you to anticipate what someone might be going through, or what might have just happened, so that you can develop strategies to support that person in the future. There was one particular really comment that stood out to me. I mean, there were so many, but one of them was actually, two, I'm going to say. One was someone said, I'm going to put on my CV, having done this, that I have developed my coping and adapting skills through being a carer, and that can go on my CV. And also that being a carer, you grow to be able to accept change. You fluctuate every day, things fluctuate, and so your ability to accept change really does grow with you as a carer. So that's me.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you. And thank you all for what you've offered. And as I went through the different groups, I could feel my heart just went out to you. Thank you for that. I want to move quickly because we're at the end of the time and wrapping up. As the end of this little 1 hour workshop webinar, your next steps would be to create and develop and keep developing written and verbal words that would help influence your potential employers. Words that will show ways that you can be of value to them. And before we end, I'd just like to suggest that we start from the inside out. And some of these comments reminded me of that. But by that, I mean, how much do we value ourselves? I think this is a kingpin point for me. Being a carer is a job that some people can't or won't do. It's the hardest job I've ever done, but it's the one I receive the most growth in. More than any other work I've done, I've learned a lot about myself. And our appreciation of ourselves is not something tangible. It's not measurable per se, but our self-pride, with humility, of course, will be reflected in the written and spoken words we use if we keep cultivating that within us. That energy in the self-pride, our appreciation of ourselves can be what I call the secret sauce that helps us sort of align with a workplace culture that fits us, that's right for us. You know, they have some empathy, they have some understanding, but that has to come through in your energy, not in something we can point to. So most others don't value us until we value ourselves. That's important. We need to spend as much time pondering about the value we have contributed as to our family members or our friends, or as a unpaid caregiver. We need to spend as much time thinking about our value as we do looking for job opportunities, because the job search is an inside out adventure. I wish you all the best and thank you for being here today with us.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you so much. Just to say thank you everyone for joining us. You'll see we've put a poll on the screen. We'd love your feedback. It's anonymous, so please let us know and we can build from this webinar new things going forward. We hope you enjoyed it. There will be a recording that we'll share with you by email in the next day or so. And we'll also follow up with links to dedicated working and caring Working and Caring Facebook group, which we're going to set up, and that should allow you to if you wish to do so, to carry on the discussion with each other and on any topics related to this. Remember, we've got next week 2 carers talking about going into the workplace, and then the following week around the emotional well-being and the emotional support that you may need. We also have one of our lunch and listens again this Thursday lunchtime. Every Thursday we have a lunch and listen, and this Thursday's lunch and listen is on self-care for carers in the workplace. So that one might be of interest to you as well. Thank you once again. Thank you to the Dementia Services Development Trust for supporting this with a grant as well. It's lovely to see you all and hope to see you all again. Thank you again.